Welcome to Kingdom Coffee. You ready to talk about that?
Yes. Anything kingdom related, I'm ready.
Awesome. I knew I had the right guy. This is Ethan Hollow, and I'm Jessica Kalashnikov. I just really wanted to ask him on because we met back at Christ Center. You're still at Christ Center, right?
Still go there.
Okay. And 2019, my husband and I transitioned out, and we've just been kind of seeing what God's up to out here on this side of the world. But Ethan, he always stood out to me as just someone who's very bold, on fire for God, willing to do basically anything that God asks of him. And just, I don't know, do you have any fear of man? I'm just wondering.
I feel like as I got older, I developed some, but I'm working my way out of that right now. That's something I'm working my way out of, and it's funny. I don't know. It's funny how there's that fear of losing friendships for standing up for truth and righteousness. And I think that my whole life I have valued those friendships are the gold of creation, the gold of life.
Yeah.
And so really trying to balance as a youth, having no fear and just speaking truth too as I get older, being like, man, I know that this person's gonna like think I'm crazy if I speak truth, to get in a place of like, this is actual true love.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know if it's too early to share a story, but I can share a story on this real quick.
Sure. Yeah.
One of my best friends from high school, I used to talk to him about the Lord all the time, and he'd just cuss me out and be like, you're you're crazy, and you're just trying to judge me and blah blah blah. And then years later, after high school, we were at Lake Shasta, and he accepted the Lord at the top of a houseboat, and he started talking about like, it's like what you said back then. And I was like, wait, you'd cuss me out and like leave and be mad and say I'm judgmental.
You were actually hearing me?
And he said, but I went home, and I recognized how God's words that came out of your mouth were stuck in my head.
Oh, that's so cool.
And I couldn't stop thinking about it, and then it would prove true throughout my life.
Wow.
So I realized that like, not only is it so important to speak the truth, even if they're going to hate you.
Yeah.
God now can work, and usually in hindsight, they're going to come back and be like, "Thank you," because it truly is love.
Yeah.
To tell them the truth. You know?
That is so good. And actually, it's just speaking of the fear of man in general. I think that is one of our biggest problems in most church organizations, is that, you know, wanting to please the people, but wanting to please God, and measuring that, weighing like, wait, have I leaned too far to pleasing the people? And that, I feel like that's one of the biggest issues that seeps into a lot of the churches. And I'm a pretty bold person, and I don't mind confrontation if it needs to bring greater connection or more truth about God or challenge someone to go deeper, etc. But that's when it's hard, is like, actually the closer you get to people and the more you're really valuing this connection and relationship, the harder it is when God asks you, I do want you to say that thing, or I do want you to stand for this, even though you see that they aren't going to like that you're going to stand for that. And they might even break relationship, you know, or whatever. And I think that's something I've been thinking about recently, is just the closer you get to people, but which is also the key. That's how you grow really great relationships, is actually get to know each other. But then that fear of man can sabotage what God is actually wanting to do. So it's just a good subject.
Well, and even go deeper, I firmly believe God pours out his authority, and he chooses people, not just because we're Christian and we claim it, but because he sees people that he can trust.
Right.
And I look at, you know, a Daniel who stood up and chose to pray no matter if it's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Or my favorite example is Samuel, who, like, as a kid, God spoke to him, and the first thing he said is, tell Eli he's done. So the guy that's been raising you, the guy that's been taking care of you,
so true.
And his sons who've been your family, the first thing you're told to do is tell him that he's done with you and he's sick of him. And then all through Samuel's life, he rebuked Saul and David. I mean, he stood up to very powerful people and just spoke truth with all authority. And I feel like God says, that's someone I can trust because they're not going to be afraid. I can put my power and authority, and I can speak my words to them because they're not afraid. And other people, we don't want to do that. We want to still think we have that power and authority, so we conjure it up, or maybe we do, maybe we don't. But ultimately, I think that God's looking for people that don't fear man, so He can actually speak to them because He knows that they'll speak. You know what I mean?
Yes, and speak for Him, not just our own agenda or what feels good to us or what won't upset the people too much. So I totally agree. That is so important that we really are willing to lay down our reputation, what people think of us, being misunderstood, all of it. I mean, even in what my husband and I have stepped into right now, of kind of stepping away from the organized church, not in the way of like that I think it's bad or wrong or that they're doing it all wrong, but in the sense of God just called us out because He wanted to start showing us like a new perspective, this new wineskin. And so I'm just kind of talking to people who are willing to look at that, talk about it. Like, I don't think they're doing it all right at the most churches in our region, but I think they're doing lots of things right. And I know they love the people, and God uses church institutions. So I know part of it is His idea, but I just want to like open that up, let's talk about it.
Well, I have a big, when I say theory, it's years of wrestling with God and feeling like God's revealing things to me. But awesome. So I believe God uses what He has.
Yeah.
And you look at Judges and you look at Samson, and when God approached Samson was not the best choice, but it's what he had, and he used these men and women that were messy, and he used them at the time in the culture, although that wasn't his dream. And there are times when there's just not something that is and the reality is that if we're not living in complete obedience, we're limited to the impact. We look at the world and we say, why aren't we making the impact we want? And we're like, God's like, well, because you're not surrendering your life, you're not living the way you should live, but I'm going to still use you as much as I can, as much as you're willing, really.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side of things, I look at the parable. Well, there's that famous Teddy Roosevelt quote about the man in the arena. You've probably heard of it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I love that
and then paired with the parable of the talents and the guy that buried his talents. So on the other side of things, I don't want to be the guy that sits back and be like, that church is wrong, that church is man, those people are totally off, and that guy's like pretty off, and then I put all my talents down, and God said, well, they took their one and they turned it into 1.5.
That's good.
So I wrestle with this. Okay, I believe these guys are very much off, but they're still preaching the gospel. And these guys are pretty darn good, but man, they're still off on these major issues they don't have a clue on. I still partner that with, okay, they're taking their talents, they're stepping up, they're speaking on YouTube, they're whatever they're doing, they're showing up on Sunday.
Right.
Like, they are doing something, and God will reward them accordingly or punish them accordingly. We don't know their heart. But it really comes back to, okay, God, so you've shown me this.
Yeah.
And I don't want to bury my talents, but I also want to build something that I believe is pure. And it comes right back down to like my personal life and trying not to judge in a way that is like, you're wrong and I know better.
Yeah.
But learning, like the same thing with my parents. They've been separated, and I look at I love them immensely, and they were great parents. And I looked at their mistakes that led to their divorce and led to, to losing money and all these things. And I want to learn from those. I love them, but I also am like, okay, I'm passionate about not doing that. I will not let bitterness and resentment sneak into my marriage because I do not want to end up losing my marriage.
Yeah.
And so I think in the same way we can love one another and then also say, but I think these are mistakes that I don't want to do. So even if they might not recognize their mistakes, I want to build something that doesn't have those in it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my...
And thinking of that way, it's a really good way you presented that, because I agree. Like, I'm not bitter at the church in general. I just realized I want more than that. I feel like there's more than that.
Hungry.
I'm hungry. And in a family, when you're being raised up and this is the family, this is all that you know, this is for you normal. Everything that is in your family is normal until you move out, usually, and start having a juxtaposition, and you're like, wait, there's different ways of doing this? Like,
yeah.
And you think that your family is actually the standard of a norm until you start tasting of these different ways, different perspectives, different flavors. Yeah. And for me, when I'm in something, I'm all in. And so it makes sense to me that God had to call us out to even start seeing from a different perspective. And it's funny because he invited me into Kingdom Coffee, which I thought was going to be a coffee shop right away. Hasn't panned out yet, but I think it is in the future. But he so used that to get my perspective to shift on possibilities and like reaching the public with God in a whole different way. Way different than what I was picturing, what I've known as ministry and from the church reaching out in the world, but literally entering into the world, being in a public space, thinking business minded. And I know you're good at that. You have a very business mindset and kingdom. So that was fun because that just opened up a whole new world to me. Like, oh my gosh, I've had a small mind. Like,
yeah, we can. We can't, as I was mentioning before we started a little bit, I grew up, my parents were part of a denomination that they got out of before I was born. And I think I won't mention which denomination, but it's a denomination I think is in the family of God, but is probably on the fence of, legalistic. Anyway, but they still believe, which was amazing because usually people, I've been in churches where I'm like, man, if this is my norm, I get why people would run from this place and not want to be part of it. And be like, Christianity sucks and it's horrible. and I've been to those services and been like, man, I would never be able to stay awake through this.
Yeah.
But they went to a place, and instead of just denying the faith altogether, they recognized, well, this is true, but this group of people just weren't living it. And so when I was born, we read the Bible, we worshiped, we prayed as a family.
That's great.
And my dad was my pastor in a sense. And then it wasn't till middle school that I went to like Camp Harlow, and then like high school that I started Bible study and started attending a church. And the funny thing is, as at first I kind of felt like out of place. So I'm like, I don't know how this is supposed to work. And now as an adult, I'm like, man, God, you protected me from that religious system norm where I see the faults, I see the areas that they're man-made very clearly, and I also see how I think he designed us to be fathers and mothers and to pastor our families, and like youth pastors, like churches don't need more youth pastors, they need more dads that step up and learn to pastor their kids.
Be there,
and if that takes a youth ministry, but if it's just temporary, so I can go off on 100 issues like that, but I just feel like that God really kind of has blown my mind, like you're saying, like shown me like just how out of the box he is of what we call normal. Like, and even with the world, people that don't believe would say it's church. If they were to say like, what's church? I'd say, oh, you actually have observed some of the things over here, but I would actually, that most pastors might agree with, but I would actually say it's bigger than that bubble.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. And I agree. And to me, that's so exciting. Like it's not threatening or scary that it's more than what we've seen. To me, it's exciting. Like, yes, thank goodness he's so much bigger than inside the four walls. I mean, wow, that's amazing. So I know that you've been kind of a part of many things in our region. It feels like, I know you started a church at one point, right?
Yeah, I was part of 3 church plants here, locally in town. None of them still exist, but they all had big movements. Of if hundreds, a couple of them had over 1,000 people at a time. And it's funny to say that because I know that's a very church thing to say. Like, we had so many people, but I did learn a lot. One was a very charismatic, Holy Spirit led, prophetic words, church, and not in the way that shocking things happen that I would never, like people that would never go to church that came one time with me and that hated it, end up on the stage crying.
Oh, wow.
When God called out something, just stuff that's like that. I've known this person forever. They would never get on stage. They never cry in front of people, and they showed up the one time. And so stuff where it's like this, obviously too very Bible teaching, expository verse by verse. You're not going to see anyone crying or dancing, to a church that was just focused on street kids and the homeless.
Wow.
And so yeah, I got to experience a lot. And in that, maybe not the first one, but definitely the second two, was really a journey to try to build something that's different. And I think the third one we had some success with that, but it's just hard. It's hard because
I can imagine.
Yeah, it's hard to do in different ways. I'll give an example. Is the last church plant we did was an amazing movement of God, but we had no paid leadership. Everything was volunteer. We had like 5 pastors that rotated and teachers that rotated. We rotate kids' church to teaching on Sunday to and the one thing I recognize about that, as organic as it was and as non-churchy as it was, in fact, a little rabbit trail is there's a local pastor of a big church that had a guy who was a biker who came to the Lord, was going to his church. He goes, I don't think he's going to stay here very long. Can you guys plug him in? Because I think he'll love your church. And he did. But like we'd have those pastors, I think over 20 pastors had visited a year at that church just to check it out, because a lot of churches support us. And we had a sermon. I remember one sermon in particular where a biker guy in the front row is like, F yeah, pastor. And his heart was pure gold. I mean, his heart, like he was like on the edge of tears, just like God's moving my life. But that's his word that he used. Yeah. And it was okay. And the pastor's like, I've never felt uncomfortable in church till I showed up at your church. And so there's that kind of thing. But the downside was not having a paid staff. It was hard to get our meetings done. It was hard to actually move forward because it's all volunteer. So when you're volunteer, you're not as committed, even if you want to be, but you got kids, and it's like, oh, I can't make it to the meeting and to be on the same page. So I came out of that being like, okay, I was very anti-paying people, but now I'm like pro-paying people because I want people to show up, at least the key people to show up. And so it's been a wrestling match with me, like, Lord, what is okay and not okay, and why is it okay? And I don't know if there isn't an is or not. It has to do with the heart of it all. Right. You have two things that look very similar, and one is completely worldly and fake, and one is very much God moving. And so just wanting I think what it comes down to is that hunger, my hunger. When I read the Bible, when I think of the men and women that followed God and how he used them, I'm like, Lord, like whatever it takes, I want that. I want my life on this earth to be like that. And then I hear from pastors either, oh, don't get excited, God doesn't do that anymore. And so either that's true, either we're supposed to just be, the people that raise our families and do nothing and don't stand up for anything, or we're doing something wrong. I don't say something wrong. We're not pressing in enough because we love this world too much. Right. And I stand very firmly over here, like, Lord, I believe you are looking for men and women that you want to use powerfully, but they have to be willing to be hated. They have to be willing to stand up for truth. They have to be willing to do whatever it takes out of their love for you and their love for people. Yes. And then I think over here you got a bunch of people that are trying to justify their life and their struggles, and saying like, hey, God just doesn't do that anymore. He just wants you to be a good husband and wife, and that feels good because that means you can keep making your money, keep just watching Netflix at night, and just
be comfortable.
Be comfortable. And so, regardless, I'm over here. I'm hungry. I'm desperate. I want to see God move. I want him to move through me. Yeah. And I know that there's nothing I can make that happen besides pressing in. And
so do you feel like you've kind of been on that journey of, you were super on fire, you were doing the stuff, you were like pedal to the metal, ministry, whatever you ask, I'm going to do it, God. And then you kind of came to a place of recognizing that raising a family, having a wife, all of that was just as important. Like, did you have to learn that, or did you know that? And so I
definitely had to learn it. Okay. This is funny. So ever since God got a hold of me, where I was like, my life is yours. I went to 77 countries. I've been to all 50 states. I've stayed with presidents and kings, and I've lived in the ghettos of India, and stayed in huts across Africa and the Middle East, and I've gotten just all these adventures. And I if I couldn't afford a phone, I didn't have a phone. I just went, and it was freeing and it was awesome. And then even when I got married, we lived very much a life like that. God had given us some businesses that provide for our family, or provide for us. We were able to give, we were able to create and start things all the time. And then all at once, between COVID regulations and between a bad business partner, our businesses, we lost those.
Wow.
Or we had to shut them down. And then at the same time, we ended up taking some kids off the street.
Wow.
And then we ended up adopting some girls.
Wow.
And we had taken lots of people off the street, but we kind of committed to 3 of them in particular, and then we had adopted 2 girls. And so all that kind of happened at once, and I had to stop everything I was doing, like the 15 organizations, nonprofits, ministries I was running. I had to step back from. We shut down the businesses, and all of a sudden, I realized I had to focus on being a dad and being a husband,
right,
just to get that healthy, because all of a sudden we were like in free fall of like drama, and I mean, there's stories that I probably can't even tell,
right,
to like just the exact broken people. I mean, this goes back to what I was saying before, like the sacrifice, the cost of taking everyone in is not to say I regret it, but just saying it cost us literally our income, it cost us our livelihood, it cost us our freedom. I mean, it cost us so much. But having to regroup and say, okay, this is the cost. So how do we make sure the things that matter are strong? Our walk with the Lord, our marriage, and then we start having bio kids. And so I do feel like that it shook me pretty big. And the funny thing is, on one way, it shook me because I felt like I was sidelined. I felt like God had said, hey, you were in charge of all these big organizations and ministries, and everyone in the church world looked up to you. Now you're like not doing any of it. And now I look back, and he took me out of that bubble, and then I got to see that like most of the world doesn't even care about that bubble. They first off, they don't even know the bubble exists. They're like shocked that there's still people that believe the Bible's true. Right. And it's such a small bubble, and the people that in that bubble that want to reach the world, they don't even know how to get out of the bubble. Like they literally don't even know how to do it. So I then saw God really showing me that, hey, my movement right now is in the marketplace. I'm moving over here. This is where I'm going to put up my anointing. I believe that pastors and churches will still have a role, but it'll be more of what the role they're supposed to have, which is to pastor and to teach. Right. Not to say, hey, I've got a vision and dream, so your job is to tithe towards it, and your job is to serve me in it. Yes. It's to literally, I mean, when I think of a pastor, I think of someone that's like a father that knows your business and that is in your life, and you can't pastor 1,000 people. You know what I mean? And then you think of a team. I agree. When I had those churches, I realized if I was going to be a good teacher, I didn't have time to pastor. Right. I had to sit and read the scriptures and think about it and read books and really try to think, hey, Lord, how can I give a message that is true and powerful? Yeah. And then if I was going to be a pastor, I need to spend my time with people, and I didn't have time to like sit and do that. And so I just realized like we have a lot of teachers out there that call themselves pastor. They're trying to pastor, but they're really teaching. Yep. And you have some people that are pastors, but their sermons aren't super great, and people don't always come because they're like, and then once you give the body of Christ, it just doesn't understand it. They're like, well, it's a teacher pastor. Yep. This guy's good, this guy's not, and they measure it by either the relationship or by the sermon, which isn't how it's supposed to be measured. And so,
no, that's like so good, and exactly what I have come to the realization of as well. It's like God did the 5-fold on purpose. I know it goes beyond that, but that's like the foundation. And if we have all 5 in function, this is my perspective, that they don't have to get burnt out. And there's not just one of each either. There's several teachers, several pastors, several evangelists. And if they're all doing their part and working together and not in competition or jealous or trying to take each other's roles or who's more special, who's going to sit at the right hand of Jesus, Yep. We're human. It always gets down to that. God has to heal all that insecurity, orphan mentality. But like your example of your church that you're trying on your own and with help of others to like, what does this really look like, Lord? And I think it's awesome you tried it, and you learned. And that's why I think we need those 5 perspectives, because it's also like a business, you have to have the different mentalities. Because if you have the one vision only, which is often what a church is, the one leader, pastor, teacher, preacher. It's like all these roles trying to be one person. That's impossible.
Yeah.
And I just think it would be so much more fun and freeing if we could all function together and just see how, I mean, I think we would look a lot like the Acts church, you know, just flowing and all of it coming together and everybody knowing that they have something to give and not so many just sitting in the chairs listening to one perspective one way. That's just the beginning. That's so small.
Yeah.
I just think there's so much more. And it's so fun too, because the pressure is off the main person. They don't have to be the main person. I think it should be 5 main persons that lead and direct, but empower all of these people to be doing all the parts. Yeah.
Well, and I think it says a lot to, I mean, if you look at any business, if you look at any, I don't know, let's say YouTube, for instance. Have you heard of Dude Perfect? The show Dude Perfect? So it's like the second or third biggest YouTube channel, and it's it's 5 college buddies that do trick shots.
Oh, you know? Funny.
And they've stuck together as 5 friends for so many years that now they make they make hundreds of millions of dollars.
Dang.
Just doing trick shots together. Like they have giant auditorium. Like they've sold out. You know, I mean, it's just crazy. But when I think of these, I mean, you see it in entertainment, you see it in business. You have people that can stick together. It's successful, and I think that when you have a one show pastor or pastor associate pastor, it's you almost have to have control behind the scenes to keep it good. But if you could really see what's going on, you'd be shocked.
Right.
Not always, but oftentimes. but when you, and this is, you know, one thing I do appreciate about where I go to church is when you have many leaders that all have a voice, and that they and knowing that some of them believe things that, you know,
you disagree with.
That I disagree with, and that other leaders disagree with in there, but they're not the things that are big enough to be like, we're not brothers.
The main things are the main things.
Yeah, so I think that says something about the love of God, and it's not that God is okay with these things or these things, but it is that like different people are in different places of their faith and maturity and their understanding and their revelation that God shows them.
Right.
And I do think there needs to be lines. I mean, there are lines where it's like this is a line where, you know, there's no way you could have
like the foundation has to be
the
gospel of God and based on the word.
But I think
then the other thing, there's totally
and
power.
People are afraid of like, oh wait, you're telling me that I might be wrong. You're rebuking me.
Right.
But there's that scripture, perfect love has no fear. So with my wife, when we first met, I was like, what do you want to eat? She goes, oh, whatever you want to eat. I'm like, sushi? And she goes, oh, that sounds great. Or hamburgers, that sounds great.
Right.
Because there's fear. There's like, I don't know if you're going to call me tomorrow. Because I kind of like you kind of like me. But now that we're married and she knows there's like, you know, we're together and there's a deeper love, it's like, you know, do you want me to do the laundry? Yeah, go do the laundry. Yeah. It's like, you know, it's perfect love has no fear. So if there's that relationship with a prophet, evangelist, you know, a teacher, that in the fivefold, or just let's say you have 3 of those at the time, then you can be rebuked. You can challenge each other and know that you can trust each other's rebuke. And I do think sometimes you might find 3 of them and you pray for the other 2, but some people just appoint other people because they think there'd be 5 and they put the wrong person in, and that's not good either. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
or I was thinking when you said that, what I see happen a lot, which is unfortunate, is the leader will choose people like them.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's a bummer. I'm like, oh, almost there.
Yeah, just I'll pick. Here, what are my biggest 4 fans? You're a prophet. You're my teacher.
You love everything I say. You love everything I say. You're in.
Yep. No, totally. That happens too. And you know, and on this same point, I mean, similar point. One thing I think that this might be a different conversation. I don't know if I should go into it.
Go ahead.
I'll bring it up.
I'll really.
I'm very passionate about this.
Okay.
When I look at like God choosing a man or a woman,
and
the things that we know about like Samson, and I mean, you name it. You almost name anyone in the Bible, David, the things they've done, and then you look at like people like Mark Driscoll or Ravi Zacharias, or people that made mistakes, that got caught, and then the church just cancels them. Like, oh man, we can't deal with them anymore. Right. And I feel like that would be like people that canceled David and like Absalom and his crew, or it'd be like all the, like I said before, the people of Blah, like the people that literally we don't know about, that don't matter, the people that were in the church or that were supposedly following God, that just never. They're the critics. They are the people that buried their talents. They are the people that wouldn't enter the arena and pointed at everyone else. And I think that oftentimes we find one thing that someone that had God had his hand on did wrong, and we cancel them.
Right.
And the reality is I feel like that's one of the biggest problems in the church too, is that there's this idea for pastors, like, I'd be perfect. Like, if I make one mistake, look what they did to him, and look what they did to him, and look what they did to him.
Yeah.
And there's not that love, and it's like, and there's not that understanding of like God chooses a person and is with them even their mistakes, even though there's no justification. You know what I mean? Like God's judgment will be clear, and as well his grace. It's not for us to understand what he's going to do with certain people. But I look at people and I'm like, that person, God is with them. He's speaking through them. There was fruit there, and the church rallied around and crushed them, and then stepped back and like, oh, good thing we weren't him. Let's not even listen to his stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it so that people fear more if you're in those bubbles and you care about those bubbles.
Yeah.
And when you're out, you just don't care anymore. Like, I don't. It's kind of like, I hear these things all the time now. It's like someone will say something like, "Well, why would I don't care what your opinion is anyway?" You know what I mean?
Right.
And so,
like,
I'm in a place where it's like, Lord, I care about your opinion is, and I want to be sensitive to the body of Christ. But ultimately, I'm not worried what people are going to try to do to cancel me when I know that I'm standing in a place that's correct.
And that's a really good place to be. And we didn't actually say that saying. What is it? The person that's in the arena. Do you remember?
Yeah, it goes hand in hand with the talents for me.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
And so
I didn't connect those two. I like that.
So it's Teddy Roosevelt. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again.
So good.
Because there's no effort without error or shortcoming. But who knows the great enthusiasm, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither knew victory or defeat, or I might say, or the people that buried their talents and just criticized and posted on Twitter and just talked about everyone and their faults.
So good. Yeah. Daring greatly, yeah. Because then Brene Brown took off with that whole saying and wrote a whole book on that. Yeah. But yes, it's true. And you can think that you do understand how it feels to put yourself out there or try to lead something or whatever. You can think you understand it, but you do not understand it until you've tried it.
Yeah.
And it does take a lot of boldness and courage to put yourself out there before the critics, because they're everywhere.
Well, and when you think of the metaphor of the arena, like Rome, let's say, is what we think of the arena, is you have a bunch of people that
want to be entertained.
Yeah, they want to be entertained. Yeah, they want to be entertained. And they either are going to champion you and make you like a god, or they're going to like mock you and stuff. But regardless, it doesn't, they mean nothing. Those people mean nothing.
Or they should.
And they should mean nothing.
Right.
And even when I think of Jesus, when like people cheered him on, they wanted to like make him a king, and he said, "I know what's in your heart."
Yeah.
It'd be like, even if you are in the arena and you're doing greatly and you're succeeding, you need to recognize, I don't bow down to what these people think. They're here to be. They'll turn on me in a second.
Yes.
Like I am here for God.
Yes.
And the fact that they're cheering me on, how can I use this to bring more glory and more influence to the truth and to God? But ultimately, they can turn on me in a flash. You know what I mean? And yet, most people stand at this place where they are like, "What do I need to do to get the arena to like me?" You know? Okay, and they fail. Like, oh man, how do I? They backtrack, and it's the wrong mindset. You know?
Well, and they never measure up, because you never can please all of the
people. Yep.
And so if you spend your life doing that, you're going to get to the end and be like, "Oh my gosh, what have I done?"
Totally.
Not worth it.
Yeah.
So back to like the church in general, like the church institution, because I like to think that we are the church, the people, right? What would you like to see done differently? Like, what do you think would be helpful that we're not seeing right now in a lot of churches?
Well, I think that we label all these things. So first off, there's like the newest books, and it's funny. I'm on this text thread. I'm on multiple text threads, but there's a newer book that came out recently, and just certain pastors and leaders that I know from 3 different groups, all within the same week, are like, "Oh, we got to talk about this book, or you guys should all look at this book." And I realized, and I've realized this for years. I realized that oftentimes leaders in the church or in the Christian community, they're literally following authors. Like they're not that it's like the newest hot book. Oh, this is a great idea. This is a great idea. And no one's on their knees. Not no one. Very rarely are people on their knees
seeking God,
saying, "God, tell me what." Instead, they're like following, which is. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do it, but I'm just saying that like it's secondary. It's like God using what He has. You know what I mean? You better hope that person is on their knees seeking God, not just having good ideas, or not just. True. We live in an age of narcissism, especially in the church. Well, it's across the whole world, but even in the church, where we want to be worshipped, we want people to like us, and so authors. I mean, it's like the thing. It's like if you're a Christian, like, oh, I should write a book someday. I'd like to write a book someday, but I also am like,
Lord, I've written books.
yeah, but I'm also like, Lord, I want to do this if you want me to, and when you want me to, because Jesus didn't write any books, and if it's not what I'm supposed to do, then
probably shouldn't.
Well, and I think of what's the famous devotional? There's like super famous devotional. I can't think of the author now. One of the most famous ones. Utmost to his.
My utmost for his highest.
Who's that by? It's
Oh my gosh, I just blanked too, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
His wife put that together. He never wrote anything. Like, he died,
really?
and she put it together. So I mean,
I never knew that.
Maybe what you want is someone else to do it. You know what I mean? Or maybe you don't want me to be. Maybe it'll all be into you. Who knows? But I just don't want to have the mindset of like, how do I promote myself, even if it's secretly, through ministry, and I could justify it as being influential for the kingdom.
Right.
But man, sorry, I got on a rabbit trail. What were we talking about? I know we're headed somewhere with that.
Just challenges. I mean, what kind of things would you like to see done differently in the church today?
So this is something I've been very passionate about, and I actually succeeded twice in being part of this. Is when I look at the scriptures, it's a full-time thing. People like even if you look at rabbis in Jesus' day, like you would drop everything and you would live with that rabbi, and for the quarter of the year or a third of the year that rabbi worked, you would work in his trade, and you were for 3 to 10 years, you were like, that was your life. You know what I mean? Like, you did not look back, and if you did well, then he sent you out in his name, and so I've thought about this my whole life because I read the Bible before I got in the church circles, and so I was like, that's man, good. I was like, these missionaries didn't raise all their money before they went; they just went. These people in the Bible, they went and lived with Jesus and lived with each other and gave everything, and were together all the time.
Yeah, that relationship.
Not Wednesday and Sunday, right. Or small groups, and so I think that there's this big thing in American culture. We've gotten so big into independence, which started as a good thing, and then now is the result of most of our mental illness, depression, and loneliness. Is that my needs, my truth, my everything is the most important thing, and give me my little house or apartment, and then I'll go to Starbucks and hang out with you, or I'll have some friends, and if I don't like you, I'll push you away because you don't agree with everything I say. And we have this mindset that's the most important thing. Then you go to these other countries where they live together, they're together every day. Not even Christians, their community is so deep and so strong because they have very little, oftentimes. And you even look at like the Chinese church and how they spend every moment together. And I feel like that a deep. So years ago, we had some houses given to us, and we had this discipleship community, these men and women's houses of just young college-age people to like 30s. And we were together every night, dinner. We did mission trips. We did trips where we just all took off in 2 cars across the country and just saw all kinds of crazy things happen, and ended up coming back with people we didn't even leave with.
You're like the Jesus people.
Yeah, it was like the Jesus people, and it was very much like we were together all the time, and we were seeking Lord, we were praying, and it was beautiful. And there's a ton of power. We saw so many people come to the Lord. We saw so much happen. So I've been part of 2 movements like that. And now, on the other hand, like the Jesus People movement, without some structure and stuff, it can get messy. You know what I mean? So on one hand, you could easily say, well, that's why we have all this over here. But out of what I've seen and learned, I think that the idea of literally being closer, like not just to my wife and kids, but to other people, where we do dinner, we do brunches, we're together as much as possible, and then not just together, but together in the name of the Lord, together in like, because I mean, there's so many moms in particular that are at home working their butts off with their kids, and just to be able to share dinners with each other where they don't have to prepare dinner for the whole family, they can just bring something and everyone's together. Just the relief off of the stress and the anxiety that they have to deal with every day is enough to just enjoy more of the Lord and what He has planned. And so I feel like there's a weight that is let off people that everyone carries together. There's the community, and I feel like that's like a starting point that I've noticed in discipleship. And we did a thing on Father's Day where we had a bunch of dads camp out in our backyard, and we brought the kids together and we blessed them. And just stuff where it's more intentional and we're doing it together and we're close enough that we can do stuff like that. It's not weird. And kind of getting away from just not even that it's wrong. I don't think it's wrong at all, but just the idea of like small groups and Bible studies, and you know what I mean? Like we appoint a once a week time,
right?
And it's not enough to really be intimate and close with people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, I feel like because it usually becomes so like program oriented. And like you were saying, there is this stigma in a lot of churches that you can't actually be real.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to get caught or you don't want to be the imposter. Like, Ethan looks like he's an amazing Christian. I would never tell him that I struggle with this, things like that, to where it hasn't been a norm to be like, hey, I'm like really struggling, like with depression. Like I might have a mental illness, like you're just like, I must be the only one because everyone in this church is smiling and I'm dying inside. So I feel like you're totally right. I think sadly, there's been a stigma, like if it's a Christian event or a Christian home group or whatever, there's an immediate like, okay, I need to put on my best behavior then. Because we're going to have this Christian Bible study.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I feel like God is really wanting to break down those walls, those expectations, and it starts in families, in homes, friends, your neighbors, and we, the people, we have a lot of influence, but we've been taught that we need this pastor, this preacher to tell us how to live. I'm not saying, I mean, that's in like a general statement, but it's kind of been that way. Like if my neighbor, he needs to get saved, I'm going to ask if he wants to go to church.
Yeah,
not,
exactly.
Hey, do you know Jesus? Like he's changed my whole life, but we think pass him on to the professional or, take him to church. And I don't even blame one specific person or exactly how it's done, but I think it's been just ingrained again and again and again, and we kind of discount ourselves what we actually have to bring. So I love that idea, and I feel the same. That's kind of what Ruslan and I have been really feeling God showing us, is like smaller groups. Do you have a healthy marriage? Do you have a healthy family? That's number one. Is that foundation strong? Then are we ministering to the people around us, welcoming them into our family? It is uncomfortable. It isn't easy. It is inconvenient. It feel like something. It costs something.
Yeah. No, it does. I talk about this all the time. Is to take. I mean, I'll just give an example, and this is looked at as champion in the world's eyes, but I think it's it shouldn't be highlighted above other things. But like to take in foster kids or kids off the street, like there's huge sacrifices of like, I mean, we have cameras and locks in our whole house because we've had so much stuff stolen and so many crazy things happen.
Wow.
And then there's the cost of just relationships with your spouse, and then the cost of time to be able to make that relationship strong that you have to set apart to basically cover the extra stress and pain that you're carrying for these other people. And then I think there's an ideology that the church has attached itself from the world, and a lot of this that makes it. I think this is even part of it, and it sounds strange how this can change the church. But I think there's this mindset of everyone's victims, and our job is to go help the victims, and they deserve it. And these kids, like for instance, foster kids, like they deserve it. They were given a bad thing in life. We're obligated and supposed to, and it's grace. I mean, grace means undeserved favor.
Right.
I mean, mercy means to be given, to not be given the punishment you deserve. Grace is undeserved favor. The reality that the church needs to step up and break away from the world is the world says, all these people have it bad, they're victims, and all you people that have it good, your job is to take care of them. And it takes out the need for grace because there's no sin. It's like there's no evil. It's your fault. It's the world's fault. And the church has almost attached itself to this, where I think there has to be this deeper understanding of like, everything we have is grace. Everything we give is grace. My kids I've taken off the streets and that I've adopted, and my bio kids, like it's undeserved favor that I'm choosing to pour my life out to them. Right. They don't deserve it. They're not. I mean, you can call, if we're going to call them victims, you can call us all victims. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it is right, and it's God's heart, and God's heart is to do this, but his heart isn't to do it in the name of victimhood.
Yeah.
And is like, you're obligated as a Christian. His heart is in the same way that he has given me undeserved favors. I don't deserve it. I didn't do anything good about it. I'm not a good person.
Right.
But he has showed his undeserved favor on me.
Yeah.
And he says, now go do it to the rest. And I think there's this mindset where we've just kind of become lukewarm in our ideology of the worldview. And we've kind of let it be hijacked by this mindset of Babylon, where we take away God and we're like, well, how do we justify doing good things? Well, it's because they're victims.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
And no one wants to hear that they don't deserve it.
Yeah.
No one wants to hear that. But I think I think that's even a deeper part of where the church is that is scary, because it's like they haven't thought one-on-one through. If you're a victim and everything you do is justified, then you don't need Jesus.
Right.
Because you didn't sin. It's my fault. You know what I mean? It's that guy's fault. It's someone else's fault. And so if we accept that ideology, which I think the church has been in general, then if we think it through, those people are like, why would I need a savior? Like, I didn't do anything wrong. This is what was given to me. I'm a victim. And I think that's where we're at with a lot of non-Christians, is they don't understand why they would need a savior, because they're like,
I'm a good person.
I'm a good person. Yeah.
I don't do bad things.
Anything I did bad was because I was, given a bad hand in life,
I was just defending myself.
I was a victim. Yeah. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of stuff that's polluted the church.
Yeah.
As you can say, yeast that is
leavened the church.
Yeah.
No, I hear you, and I feel like that is kind of hand in hand with the whole PC spirit, the politically correct. I feel like totally. It has seeped into the church big time, and that's back to what we were talking about in the beginning, just the fear of man. Caring more about what man thinks of us, whether or not the people are going to like what we have to say. People don't like to hear that they might be living in sin, or might not be doing something right, or when God says whitewash tombs or brood of vipers, it's like Jesus didn't really candy coat it.
Yeah.
But he loves. I mean, it's all in love. And I think that's, for me, he corrects the son that he loves. He disciplines the son that he loves. Sometimes it is good to hear the harsh truth in love. And that corrects us, because our own hearts can deceive us and be like, no, I'm actually comfortable. I'm good. I'm happy. Let's not mess this up.
Yeah. And to trust that he'll work. And I feel like that one thing I've been, on a personal level, been like, Lord, I feel like my faith is not where it used to be. Help build this back. So for instance, in the past, my faith would be, I'm going to speak truth to someone I love, not in a religious way, but like I'm going to speak it in a way that, like, I genuinely love you. I'm going to be very careful with my words. I'm not going to stand on a mountain and die on a mountain that I know is not matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I might be passionate. Let's say I believe we should have guns, and I own guns, but I'm not going to die on that mountain.
Right.
But I am going to die on the mountain of sin and for instance, the whole lie of critical race theory and stuff like this. Like, those are mountains I die on, because if that's true, then there's no need for Jesus. You know what I mean? If critical race theory is true, then Jesus, there's no need for him, because there's no one that sins. And so I'll die on those mountains, because I'm like, this is a lie straight out of the pits of hell to deceive a whole generation.
Right.
And so so in that, trusting that in love, I'm going to speak to someone and be like, man, see, this doesn't make sense. And let's use that as an example, but even logically and rationally, it doesn't make sense. But I give all the examples and argue it, and they might just be like, you're, just all this stereotypical, like you must be a bigot, racist, whatever, and just the stuff they've been told to spew because I lovingly disagreed with them.
Disagree. Yeah. Let's look at maybe another perspective.
And then as they walk off, be like, Lord, I hope that you bring that relationship back, and I pray that you prove true your words. These are your words, not my words. Then right, and I think that takes faith to have hope that, okay, Jim that just walked off, like there's gonna be a day he's calling me back, and we're reconciled, and he's, you know what I mean? And but I feel like we don't have that faith, so we don't do it, or we do it out of, people do it out of, like, they don't care about the relationship,
right.
and that's a minority of people. You see it on YouTube all the time, just so-and-so own liberal, you know what I mean? It's like, no one, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see us just own people and make them look like fools and walk away and drop the mic.
No, there's no point.
But that small minority of people, they can be magnified, be like, this is what a Christian is. And so then we're all like, we don't want to open our mouths. You know what I mean? But that's this little minority over here, and the reality is over here with genuine relationships and conversations that are out of love and out of like logic and reason, Hopefully I'm not getting too off on a rabbit trail
No,
here.
this is good. It's good. I mean, it's all connected, and I think it's kind of what has seeped into the church to bring these weird stigmas and tiptoeing and not saying what you actually think or feel, or go to your brother when he offends you.
And
don't cancel out the whole church and spew off all these terrible things about the whole church because your brother offended you and you didn't go to him. So anyways, how do we wrap this one up?
Well, generally, I will say this. This is a good way to wrap it up. Here locally, and I've been to 77 countries in all 50 states. Here locally, God is doing something very unique where there's a lot of unity among the churches. And I think even more so since COVID, there's been a humility among pastors.
That's cool.
Recognizing that they aren't the center. And what I did notice is a lot of churches got so shaken where people just didn't go to church, didn't care that much anymore. Some pastors that were in it for, even if it was a portion of them and it was a little bit of like narcissism, like I'm important to these 50 people or these 100 people, and they all of a sudden had to decide, like, am I doing this for Jesus or am I doing this for me?
Oh, wow.
And some people stepped back and some people stepped up and said, okay, I think I was probably doing a lot for me, but now I'm going to do it for him, and it's going to be harder. But I recognize this humility. And then between the humility and the unity, there is very much a mindset of God is doing something bigger. And there's really been a push of pastors saying, he's moving in the marketplace, and we don't really understand the marketplace because we live in this bubble. And even though we know that this is biblical, it's like if I wake up and read my Bible all day and go have coffee with people, it's different than the guy that has to be at work at 7 a.m. and doesn't get a 15-minute lunch break, and then, you know what I mean? And so to tell him how to live and how to live out his faith it's like I can't relate. But then what we're seeing is people rise up in the workplace and talk and share testimonies and talk about how God's moving in the workplace, and they're being encouraged because they're like, oh, I get that. I'm an employee also, or I work for the state, or I work for the whoever, and it's encouraging them. And then pastors, rather than shutting that down, being like, whoa, like, these are people that go to my church. They're encouraging it,
Good.
So I think it's the minds. I think that the plus locally, and this isn't for everyone, but I think this is for quite a few people. And I think the plus locally is there's this humility that is God is doing something bigger, and I play a role, but I'm not the central role that the like maybe other communities would be like, we're the pastors, we're the central role.
Right.
And I think that's a good starting point. But ultimately, I think that it's going to come down to some pioneers that get on their knees and to get hungry and that cry out and that fast and pray and say, God. And then as he speaks, step out and are willing to pay whatever it costs to and fail even and fail again, like the quote says, to take what God's given them and multiply them into something, and ultimately trust in him, being like, God, like, I feel like you want me to build something, and I think it's supposed to look like this, and I need your help because I can't do it.
Yeah.
And then even for people to come together and encourage each other in that. I think of like how powerful it is when just let's say business-wise, let's say that I have a small business, you have a small business, and 4 of the people in small business, we share office space, and we at least can be like, okay, I feel like giving up today, but okay, we all get this. We're all in the same boat. This is hard.
Yeah.
And just to be, even if it's that, like not the same name of the ministry, not the same whatever, but to be in relationship with each other, being like, hey, we're pioneering something that's different. God's obviously doing this because a lot of people have the heart, and just being together, encouraging each other, being willing to challenge each other, and you know what I mean. And
yes,
so I think
really
these
good.
are starting points that, and the very fact about this conversation, that I know I have this conversation on a weekly basis with people, that God is doing something, and it's and he's laying a foundation. Maybe we're going to be the foundation builders for our kids to actually see the fruit, which would suck.
That could be.
I don't want to look at the promised land from a mountain, but if that's the plan, I will be more than happy to at least help build it. Yeah, exactly.
Let our ceilings be their floors.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that is really good, and thank you guys for listening. And I hope this was encouraging, and that you can just be encouraged that whatever God is calling you to do, it might look different than you thought, and that's okay. And it is important to find those people that God is highlighting in your life, whether you understand it or not. Listen to those nudges, call those people, reach out, say yes to coffee, whatever it is. I feel like it is that God's doing all these little connections and moving the pieces on the chessboard, so just give him your yes, and he is delighted to work with us and partner with us. And thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sharing your heart, and I hope you all are blessed. Until next time.